Good afternoon or good evening, depending on where you are, and a very happy new year to you all, and welcome to today's webinar, EAL Matters, Nurturing EAL Towards Bilingual. My name is Costa Constantinou, a former school leader and now the Director of Educational Services at Bilingual Education, and it's a great pleasure to welcome you to another CPD webinar. Hosting the webinar with me today will be my colleague Lisa Ashers, our teaching and learning consultant, author, and keynote speaker at Bilingual Education. Lisa has made it her mission to transform how teachers can acquire a more whole school approach to education. Lisa has developed teams of advanced practitioners, both in the UK and overseas, working in Ghana, Nepal, and more recently, Kenya. She's passionate about such projects and about using her expertise to develop projects and about using, expertise to develop coaching programs for schools. In her latest book, Manglish, she considers how English and maths can be creatively brought together and offers practical ideas and strategies for improving literacy and numeracy throughout the whole school. Her published books include There Is Another Way, the second big book by Independent Thinking, and she has also contributed to Don't Change the Light Bulbs, a compendium of expertise from the UK's most switched-on educators. Her new book, Teacher in the Cupboard, Solution-Focused Human Teaching and Learning, is due to be published this year. The learning outcomes for today will be to explore the best practice techniques for removing EAL barriers in the classroom, to provide a better understanding of what it is like to be an EAL learner and so remove their learning barriers, and finally, to explore the journey of an EAL learner from no understanding to bilingual. There will be time for questions at the end, so please do send them through to me and we will take them in the last 10 minutes of the webinar. Any questions we do not have time to answer, please do send them across by email and we will get back to you by next week. And just before I pass you over to Lisa, you can also listen to all our CPD webinars via our website where we have uploaded them along with follow-up teaching resources. So it's now time, without further ado, for me to hand you over to Lisa. Enjoy the webinar, and I look forward to taking questions in about 45 minutes time. Over to you, Lisa.
Okay, thank you very much, Costa. Now I wanted to start with this slide, not just because I want to shamelessly self-promote, but I wanted you to think about this webinar not as something where you're going to listen to it, you're going to get all the answers, and you're going to be able to solve all your problems like that. Because both of the books that I've written, they're all about problem solving, but they're not about doing the problem solving for you. They're about seeing a problem, observing that problem in your own context, and thinking about how you are going to solve that problem. So I want you to think about that as we're going along today. Now, some of the common problems that we have with EAL learners might be that they're silent. It might be that they miss certain words out of sentences when you're expecting them to do a piece of writing. It might be that they don't want to join in. It might be that the curriculum that you have to teach is just much too hard for them because perhaps they've come in at a secondary level. These are common problems, but these are not all of the problems that our EAL learners face. And all of the contexts that we're in as well are going to be completely different. So if there are people listening from all around the world, we might have one EAL learner in our class or one EAL learner in the whole school, and you might have a whole classroom full of EAL learners. So I want you to think about your problems before we start this. The way that I observe problems, I start with what is the problem, and I want you to think about this too as you start this. What is your problem? Then what we do is we observe the problem. We think about what is actually going wrong in reality, not what we think is going wrong, but observing the problem by looking at what's happening in the classroom, looking at the work that's being produced, looking at everything that we can so that we can start thinking about some solutions. Within this webinar, you'll find some ideas for solutions. It's not a how to do this, it will absolutely work. It's some ideas for solutions. The next stage after observing the problem is to test out solutions one at a time, thinking about what might work for you, observing the results of those solutions and reviewing your next steps. So before we get started, please do take a moment. Think about what your problems are. If you've got a piece of paper and a pen handy, start making a list to the barriers to learning that holds your children back, your EAL learners. Like I said, if that's a full class, or if it's an individual learner, really think about what their barriers to learning are. Spend time observing them after this webinar over 1 week. Don't throw everything that you've learned at them and hope that something might stick, but take a step back and think about how you might observe that problem so you can start thinking about what solutions might be right for you. Examine the real barriers that they face and use this observation to start observing the potential solutions and practice purposefully. So to begin with, I want you to think about what it feels like to be an EAL learner. Now, recently, I did some training with a group of teachers in Kenya. Their issue was that they had full classrooms full of EAL learners. So each child might have come from a different background. It was an international school, but pretty much every child in that classroom had EAL at some level. And what I wanted them to do to begin with was to think about what it is like to become an EAL learner. So I can't do this over the internet, not so easy. And if you'd like to have a look at this in more detail and what we actually did, I've written a blog for Cobus. You could find that on my Twitter feed, and I'm sure that we can send that out if anybody would like that via email. But what we did was we split the group into two and we gave them a brand new language, a brand new culture. One group outside the room, one group inside the room. The group inside the room were obsessed with trading cards and they didn't like physical touch. The group outside of the room were segregated, men and women. The women only ever talked about their achievements and the men only ever talked about their women's achievements. They were all about hugs and kisses and love, and we got them to really get that culture going. Once they were confident, we started swapping people from cultures without any information about what that other culture was about. Now you can imagine when they started to swap over and go into each other's cultures that it was it's quite different to what they were experiencing. And we did this to try to get to understand what an EAL learner might feel like coming into a brand new culture, because you can understand intellectually what it's like. You can have lists of ideas. So for example, we might be thinking of it being scary. We might think that it's a little bit disconcerting, but to actually feel it, not intellectually understand it, was very different. Some of the things we learned was that actually there were positives to the experience, because before they came into their new culture, they were excited to learn more about this new culture. That was until they got into the new culture. Once they got in there, they felt that it was overwhelming. It was too much information. It was extremely difficult to fit in. Really important realizations when a new person entered the culture. So when perhaps you were in the trading card culture and somebody came into your culture, actually they found that they didn't want them there because it was too difficult to get to understand them. Now, looking at that, that was an important realization, something that we might not have thought of if we didn't experience that, because actually the children in the classroom might be feeling like that when somebody else comes in. It's just important to reflect on what it might feel like to become that EAL learner. Another thing that was important was in the culture where it was all about the hugs and the kisses and the talking about your achievements, there was nothing to hold on to. There was nothing to get you into that culture. You had to just try and work it out for yourself. In the culture where it was trading cards, so the teachers that took part in this said that the fact that they were given trading cards to go in felt like they at least had a starting point. So try and think about, when you're looking at your problems that you're facing with your EAL learners, try and look from their point of view. What does it really, really feel like? By examining their perspective, we might gain valuable insights into the problems that they have. So if we're thinking they're silent, they don't want to join in, instead of just thinking they're silent, they're annoying, I need them to speak now, I need them to join in, why won't they do it? By looking at their perspective, why are they silent? What are the emotions that are going on inside them? What is making them behave in this way? Because that silence is a barrier to learning. But by understanding why, by trying to get an insight from their point of view, we're more likely to tackle those barriers. Right, so now I'm going to go into more of here's some ideas. Okay, so we're going to be looking at EAL as a progression towards bilingual, not as a problem, not as a yes, it's a problem, but not as a problem that we've got to fix. We've got to make them begin to speak English and that's it. But as a progression towards bilingual, not forgetting their home language and replacing it with English, but allowing their home language to flourish alongside developing English so that they can achieve with English as an additional language. So first of all, think about your assessment. How are you setting a baseline for these students? How are you determining their learning progression? How are you assessing them to make sure that not just you know where their levels are, but what their next steps are? Do you have EAL specialists in school? How do you use those EAL specialists? If you don't have EAL specialists, are you tapping into external support? Perhaps in the area that I live in, I know that we have very little EAL in school. It's usually 1 or 2 children. So not a lot of money is available in the local authority for EAL. And so we can struggle on our own, but you don't have to struggle on your own. There are a couple of places that you can go to, websites that are great. There's NELDIC, obviously the British Council is fantastic. And there are many places that you can go to, but think, where are your outside supports? And how do you reward the journey for students when progress may appear slow? So I'm going to take you through some ideas that I've tried just as a classroom teacher, thinking about how I might set a baseline assessment, how I might support them in their progression, how I might use external support, and how I'm making sure that their next steps are purposeful. All right, determining the next steps. Now, I love solo taxonomy, but any taxonomy can be used to determine where children are in their learning. The reason I love solo taxonomy mainly is because it's really simple. And so when working with EAL students, I think about the solo journey that they might be on. Now, if you've never heard of solo before, again, you can find loads of information about it on the websites, but I'm using this as the levels that we're going to go through in the ideas that we're going to use. So it goes very simply. Pre is your silent phase. This is where they don't speak. Uni is where they might have simple single words. Multi, they have many words, many phrases, but they don't have the ability to apply them to new context. It's very much parrot-like in response. Relational is the ability to apply to different contexts. So they have many words and they'll adapt those words to a new context by using their metacognition to think about what they already know and how they can apply it to something new. Extended abstract is bilingual. This is the ability to apply, swap, create, use both languages to achieve. Okay, so that's it very simply. This is the structure of observed learning outcomes. Pre means you have no previous learning. Uni, you have simple learning, single words. Multi, lots of learning. Relational is lots of learning and able to apply to new contexts. And extended abstracts, lots of learning, able to apply and create from your depth of knowledge. You'll notice that the first 3 are all about gathering information. That's surface learning, but it's a really, really important phase. And the second half, this is your deep learning. This is your ability to apply, your ability to create. So solo taxonomy is not a new taxonomy. It was created in 1982. It's all about the goals of the learning process. The simplest must be achieved before the next ones can take place. So this is why I like it. It's a nice ladder that we can use towards success. So we can easily put each stage of our EAL students on this ladder, and it gives us something to aim for the next steps. So if we've got the students who don't understand, we know we're starting from scratch. But actually, EAL students, that term EAL does not mean that they are all the same. In fact, EAL learners are just like any other person on this planet. They're individual. They have their own individual context, their own individual needs, their own individual problems and barriers to learning. And so this is a nice way of putting it into a ladder without determining that actually all EAL students need this particular type of support. This one makes it, if perhaps that student is fluent in English, but they have problems with the reading and the writing, perhaps they're at the relational level. So it's a way of thinking about it. Silent phase, simple single words, lots of words, but parrot-like in response, unable to adapt to new situations. Lots of topic areas, both words and sentences, can adapt or learn to new situations. Fluent in the language, this is the goal, it is bilingual. It's not the end of the journey, because this one is about creation, and you can always return to multistructural and explore new knowledge with these learners when they're at the top. Okay, so ideas. When you have the silent phase, this is the student that has come into your culture with no understanding of the background of your culture, no words, perhaps they've been flown in very quickly, and they just have to hit the ground running like that, and they come into your room and they're silent. And here's some ideas. So number one, use their home language. EAL is not SEN. It is not a specific learning need in that they're not, perhaps they've got high prior attainment where they came from, but actually they just don't know your language. It is not SEN. Use their home language. Make sure they stay interested in learning. Make sure you understand where their level is at in their home language, and allow them to speak in their home language. I read some advice for EAL learners, which was really scary. It said, in your EAL, with your EAL learners, they must not use their home language. They must be punished if they use their home language more than 3 times in a lesson. Now, this is horrendous. In my mind, it is horrendous, because that home language is not lesser than English. They need the English in this situation in order to access the learning in this English environment. But they also need their home language. This is an important language. So to punish them for using that makes no sense for me. In fact, if they use their home language, it's going to help them to get the skills that they need to access this language. So use home language. Try concentrating on one linguistic element at a time. Use images. So images can speak 1,000 words. I know that I had a friend who works in a primary school. She had a learner in the silent phase who unfortunately kept having accidents. He didn't quite make it to the toilet. A very simple solution to this, she created for him an image of a toilet. If he needed the toilet, he was to show this image to her and she would take him to the toilet. Images can speak 1,000 words and can overcome some certain problems. Consistency and repetition, doing the same thing over and over so that the students can come into contact with that more than once. Faith that they will get there. Sometimes, you know, the teacher can give up if it is too difficult. We need to have faith that these students can get there and that they're on a ladder, and perhaps the silent phase might last a while, but that doesn't mean to say it's going to last forever if we support them and work with them. Simple substitution tables are great as well for getting them to join in. A great place to get started for this. The British Council have got a lot of information on how to create substitution tables, but I've got some examples for you here of what they look like. So we've got here a very simple substitution table. Wilbur is, and we have the emojis there for happy and sad, or the cat is, and again we have the emojis for happy and sad. If you're working with a student who is at secondary level, this might be beneath them, but I hope you can see how keeping it simple to begin with is a way for them to get into the language, but don't dumb it down too much if they're at the secondary level. Create something that allows them to enter into the language. This example here can help them to understand how common nouns and proper nouns appear differently in sentences. So think about the purpose of the substitution table. I said that one of the things we need to think about is concentrating on one language element at a time to get them to understand how our language works. Using something like this for different reasons and repeating it for, you know, the dog is sad, the person is sad, and so on, can allow them to see how it works in the same way for different reasons. So simple substitution tables. Of course, you can have words and not images as well. We've got there the present tense, the past tense, the perfect tense, thinking about allowing them to make a choice in their response, not just having Wilbur is and then frightened, allowing them a choice. What do you think Wilbur is? Is Wilbur frightened right now? Was he frightened, but has he come out of that? Think about how you're going to use these. You can also use these, and I like this one, for personal responses. So perhaps you've enjoyed a story together, perhaps you've just done a little bit of work together, and you want each person to give their response to whatever they've just done. This substitution table allows them to make a choice of how they enter into that conversation. Now, I remember I had one EAL student who was in the silent phase, and I made a big mistake because I'd prepared everybody for this speaking and listening assessment. Everybody was prepared. It was all about a murder case. It was very elaborate. We had dead bodies on the floor and everything. And then it came to their speaking and listening part. And I asked each person questions, and each person responded. And, you know, they were the people who had English as their first language were responding in depth. And this one boy who had English as an additional language, I asked him the question, do you know who's responsible for the murder? Now, we had a breakthrough because he said, yes, but that was it. The problem was I'd asked a closed question. The problem was that I hadn't given him the opportunity to elaborate upon that. Now, if I'd have used something like this, and I'd have broken it down so that he could see the individual elements that make up the language, but also so that he could make the choice about what he was saying. One, he might have been able to respond in more of a full sentence way, but he would have been able to make the choice in how he responded. So think about how you allow them to make personal responses, and I really like the substitution tables as an idea for that. You can adapt them for science, you can adapt them for maths, you can adapt them for any subject really, as long as you're thinking about what they need to respond. Think about what you want them to say to you, what you want them to understand, what you want them to think about. You can see a much more complicated version here in prediction for science. Again, the British Council have got lots of examples of this. Now, lots of great blogs out there on substitution tables to support your learners in getting started in using the language. So that's the pre-structural phase. It's all about support. It's all about giving them the ladder to begin to get involved in your lessons. We go from there to the simple phase. Now, I've been doing a lot of work in Nepal at the moment, and I would definitely say I have just come out of the pre-structural phase into the simple phase in my ability to speak Nepalese. I can say very simple things like Dhanyabad, thank you. I can say Miranam Lisa Ho, my name is Lisa. Up until recently, if somebody asked me what my name was, I probably would have answered in my name is Lisa, because I was in the silent phase. I was scared to use the words in case I sounded silly. I'm in the simple phase now, and I need a lot more support. Now, we can use images with words, that can help, videos with subtitles or sounds and card sorts, organizers, so allowing them to organize their thinking, doing one thing in many different ways so they can repeat. We might flip their learning and use homework to prepare them with the language and the knowledge that they need wherever possible to be able to actually get into our lessons and to join in. So we can use all of these things. For me, being in the simple phase, when I'm in Nepal, the most important thing is using the language. So actually having conversations with Nepalese people, actually having a reason to use the phrases that I'm being given. So not just think about when you're setting up learning for these students who are in the simple phase, think about what the purpose is in what they're saying. Allow them to practice with the language and allow them to practice in many different ways so that they start to become more confident, because I think that's important, but also so that they can start to see that there is purpose in using this language. And when I'm talking about flipping the learning and giving them the vocabulary before they enter your lesson, imagine this is your exam right now. So in a moment, you're going to sit this exam. I'm going to ask you the question in a moment. Here is your exam. Robert was Gasconard in his approach to the topic, but his friends thought he was Glaikit. In lessons, he was a gongoozler, making him prone to harmathithia. In your own words, describe Robert. Unless you knew those words, you wouldn't understand that he was boastful, stupid, an idle spectator, and making mistakes. And often the reading material that we provide to these students can be overwhelming in this way. They can't make sense of it. So if you use home learning, or indeed if you have intervention outside of the classroom, how can you link that home learning or link that intervention so that it is pre-learning before they come into your classroom, not giving away the answers of what you're doing, but allowing them to understand what the vocabulary is before they enter your lesson. Now, this is a great book for any of the teaching and learning geeks out there, The Hidden Lives of Learners by Graham Nuttall. One of the things he observes learning across, I think he observed learning in one school, and it was across around 2 years. And what he was interested in is how learning happens. And one of the things he came up with was that a student had to come into contact with a complete idea at least 3 times before having that as something that they could recall a year later. Now, if we're racing through the curriculum, or we're racing through the things that we want them to learn, one after another, then the chances are they might be able to pass a quick exam, but they might not remember that in a year's time because they haven't had it slowed down and given them the ability to practice new concepts. So keep that in mind with your EAL learners. How are we allowing them to practice? This is often what our curriculum looks like. English, maths, science, physics, art, lots and lots of information, and a knowledge-rich curriculum is really important. However, it is a lot of different ideas working against each other in separate ways, a separated curriculum. This can be confusing and information overload, even for a student with English as their first language. So think about ways, especially with this student who's in the simple phase, how can we tie this together? And one of the ways we can tie this together is thinking about the words that they need in each of these subjects. Thinking about the writing, the reading, the communication, the numeracy that run throughout each of these subjects. The first book that I wrote, Manglish, is about how we can join the curriculum together so that it looks something more like this, so that all subjects are working together, supporting each other. That might be more difficult depending on whether you're primary or you're secondary, but think about how can you back up learning that they've already done so they're not going from English to maths to science to history to geography with information overload. What thread can tie that together to support them in seeing and practicing this vocabulary in different contexts? Really simple ways of doing that, having literacy mats that they can take from one lesson to another. So self-monitoring mats for reading, so that each time they're reading in a different subject, they recognise that this is reading. You might have writing mats in each of the subjects where it's the same across the whole curriculum. So if they're learning how to write to describe in English, then they can practice that in history. They can describe things in history. They can practice that in geography. They can describe things in geography. Just think about how you tie in the curriculum together so that it's not information overload for these students. This is what we're aiming for. This is my artistic interpretation of the curriculum working together. Literacy and numeracy running through the heart of what everybody do, but it's all about the progress of that one learner. We're not working individually, we're working all together to make sure that that learner makes progress across the curriculum. I find that reading, writing, communication, and mathematics, these tie the curriculum together. As I said at the beginning, this is about problem solving, and every context is different. So if you're looking at this as something to solve in your context, think about observing it first. What is already happening and what can you do to make a change, small changes to begin to tie things together to support these learners? Have that as your question. How can you remove cognitive overload as a barrier to their learning? So just think about that, scribble that down. Think about how cognitive overload is something that our English as a first language students face. How could it be removed for everybody? All right, we're in the multi-phase. At this stage, we still have parrot-like responses. They have a lot of language, but they might not necessarily be able to apply that language in a new context. So for these students, using that language, group work, grouping the students for specific purpose so that they can be with students who are excellent models for using the language, and students who can coach them in using their own language for specific purposes. Developing independence through highlighting skill. I've got an example of how to do that in just a moment. And through careful questioning, thinking about how you ask questions that allow them to apply old learning to new concepts. So this is my idea of how we can Support the journey, because sometimes with EAL learners, it might feel like we're making really small baby steps. So they might stay a level 2 if levels exist where you're from, a level 2 for a long time. And that can be, you know, that can put you off learning if you think I've never changed over the course of this last month. But actually progress is being made. And this is just a really simple passport for learning. So not concentrating just on the language skills, but also on the learning skills. Here the students collect merits for being creative thinkers, independent inquirers, reflective learners, team players, effective participants, self-managers. If I observe that behaviour happening, that is a behaviour that's going to support them in their journey towards bilingual, because they are being independent in seeking out the language for themselves. They're effectively taking part within group work, and that group work is supporting them in listening to other people's language skills to support them themselves. So I hope you understand how that can work with the EAL learners, but all learners as well, to see that there's a journey that they're on. So this is a passport that they have every lesson, and in those lessons I'm rewarding that progress. At the end of a half term, they get a little reward for having the most stickers the first time, but the next time it's the most improved. So it's that growth mindset of always on that ladder to improvement. I want you to have a little go at reading this in silence. I'm just going to give you a few seconds. This comes from Why Don't Students Like School by Daniel T. Willingham. And I can't see your reaction, but a reaction usually looks a little bit like this as people are reading this, because it's difficult, it's vague, and it's meandering. The interesting thing to note about this is that none of those words are difficult words. The procedure is actually quite simple. They're all fairly simple words. The reason this is difficult, vague, and meandering, I'm just going to give it a title. This is a guide to washing clothes. Now, if you try and read this again, it should now make sense. It's no longer difficult, vague, and meandering. And the reason for this is that you now have context. When we're reading, we are searching in our long-term memory, we're searching for information to link what we're reading to make sense of what we're reading. If we have no context to link it to, then the reading becomes difficult, vague, and meandering. I want you to think about this when you are putting any text in front of these learners. How are they reading this text? It's not about the simplicity of the language, it's about their past understanding. I think the one thing you could say about the best thing you can do for your EAL learners is to know your learners, know what they know their background, know their context, understand them completely. And that way you'll have a better insight into what they will find difficult, vague, and meandering. And you can support them in the process of being able to access those texts. Now, this isn't just for EAL learners. This is about being knowledge rich or knowledge poor. I just quickly skipped past Matilda there, who said, don't worry about the bits you can't understand. Sit back and allow the words to wash around you like music. Beautiful idea. But actually what we do is, if we're knowledge poor and we feel it's difficult, vague, and meandering, is we switch off and we no longer want to read. And we look for our sense of satisfaction somewhere else. What we need to create for our students is a desirable difficulty. So this is me and my husband, by the way, and I'm just going to let you into a secret. I am the worst gift buyer ever. I've never managed to buy him a gift that he actually liked yet. I don't think he's fussy. I think I am really rubbish. I bought him this book, How to Change the World with a Ball of String. It's a children's book, and my husband is a certified genius. He was not impressed. He opened this book, and this to him is not a challenge. We can't put texts that are too easy in front of our learners. Even if they are EAL, it has to be desirable. It has to be something that they have to wrestle with. Now, on the other side is me. I was made head of media studies in my first year of teaching. So I was an NQT, suddenly head of media studies. I got given this book and told that it would be absolutely fine because all of the answers are in this book. When I opened this book, it doesn't matter that I had a degree, I was working on a master's, I had a postgraduate certificate in education. That book was difficult, vague, and meandering. I couldn't understand a word of it. And then 2 years later, after teaching media for quite some time, I returned to this book and I could read it as easily as I could read Roald Dahl. It's about having the context first. Think about how you can give them that context if they don't already have it. Think about the texts that you're putting in front of them. Think about how you can get them to access those texts so that they feel like a desirable difficulty for them. Don't make it too easy. Don't make it too difficult. Make it just right. So it's something that they will thrive when they're reading. So we move to the relational phase. When we're relational, this means that we probably appear fluent in the English language. We have got lots of words and phrases, and we're now able to adapt those words and phrases so that we can enter into conversation in unfamiliar territory. A great place to deepen your knowledge for this. A friend of mine, Camille, writes a blog called Value Diversity Teacher. He is a real expert in understanding not just the basics of EAL, but those students on the next level. So well worth a look if you're looking at this next level of learning with the students. But it's about setting up new ways for them to apply their old language so that they can practice, but it needs to be a desirable difficulty. We need to challenge them in their learning, not just of learning the English language. At this point, perhaps you might start thinking about them using their language as well to give presentations, to develop ideas, but really we're on that journey towards bilingual. We're getting close at this point. Think about the type of question that you're asking this learner. If we're asking them to identify what is her name or summarize what happened, remember this is quite a low order skill. It is still important to have that base knowledge, but why are you asking that question? Where is the challenge in that question? If the reason for you asking it is that they need that knowledge before the next steps, great, but know why you're asking the questions. Make sure that the questions are for them, for the learners at the right level to challenge them intellectually. So deduction questions, why did this happen? This is when we're getting deeper. Infer, how does he feel? They have to wrestle with the knowledge that they have in order to answer questions like this. Analyze, if this changed, how might this change the story? And comparison, how is this like this? Think about the level of difficulty in the questions that you're asking these students, but know why you are asking those questions. Knowing your subject and what you actually want them to learn is key. Knowing what your next steps for learning are is key. Knowing why you ask the questions that you ask for the outcome that you want to see them achieve in their learning goals, knowing that is key. So a great example of questions that can challenge divergent questions. This is one of my favorite. The reason I like this is because this for differentiation is great. Students can identify, so the low skills can be covered. The just identifying and gathering knowledge, so we can keep it simple. We can start to predict, so getting more difficult in their ability to predict ideas. Make deductions, we can analyze, we can compare. A divergent question, what you need is, first of all, there needs to be any outcome to this question. There is no right answer. This is not problem solving where it has a right answer. This is divergent. They can go anywhere. It is up to them to come to their own conclusion. Next, you need a problem. So in this case, our ship is sinking and only one of us can survive. Who's the most selfish and who would you pick? So when I do this with the students, it's a starting question for the lesson. I've usually got a captain's hat on and I say that I'm Captain Ashes and I'm going down with the ship. 3 people are still on board the ship and there is 1 place left on the lifeboat. Who do you think should survive? Of course, the students say things like, well, can they not sit on each other's knees? No, that's not an option. Only 1 person can survive. 2 people are going to die today. So they have this problem that they've got to solve. We tell them about the people. We've got Robert Devlin, 58-year-old school teacher with 3 children of his own, loves fishing. Marnie Spence, a 15-year-old schoolgirl, worst subject to citizenship, excels at ICT. Roberta Mann, a 35-year-old housewife who loves diamonds. Okay, imagine you're the student. And remember, we're at a relational level here. So we're fluent and we're able to engage in this question. The tools that are coming up can support them in thinking at that deeper level. I want you to imagine that you're that student. Who are you going to pick? Okay. Now, if you've chosen Robert, students never choose Robert. And the reason they don't choose Robert is because he's a teacher, deserves to die. Nobody typically goes for Roberta either. And Marnie is usually the favourite. So if you've picked Marnie, she's usually the favourite. The next thing I do is I'll ask them to have the discussions about who they chose and why. And as they're having this discussion, I will throw in thought bombs. Thought bombs are just small plastic balls with a thought inside. And the thought inside is supposed to make you think and go, pow, hence the bomb. And the thought bombs include things like, Robert Devlin is now retired. He hates his children. He left his job under a cloud of suspicion. He enjoys fishing because it means that he can get away from his family. Marnie is, she sabotaged the ship. She's a convicted killer. She had an affair with a citizenship teacher. This is the one that gets the students, when I throw this bomb in, she's pregnant. They're like, what? And at this point, we've got real emotional engagement. This allows them to stop and think about the judgments that they make, the first step, the next step, and they've really got to wrestle with this information so that it's not just a really easy, simple answer that they're coming up with. Roberta, however, did you notice the capital letter on diamonds? That's not a mistake. That is a proper noun. And the reason that's there is because that's the name of her charity. She works for a blood diamond charity. She fosters orphans. She used to be a doctor, but she gave up this work when she had children of her own. Loads of reasons to say Roberta, and yet the first instinct would normally be to go for the young girl. So a divergent question is a great way to get the students really thinking. And you can use this just for identify, who do we think is the most, who do we think has good qualities? Who do we think has bad qualities? Nice identify. We can analyze this because we can ask questions about, if this person was going to be the head of our school, which one would we choose? So we can go deeper. We can compare the different characters. How is Robert better than Marnie? How is Roberta better than Marnie? And so on. So we can really use this question in loads of ways, which is why I love them. But leading on from this, we can't just give them the question and hope that they will succeed. Leading on for this, the things that I use to support are, first of all, some flashcards to allow them to think about previous learning. So their previous learning was about persuasion, and they needed to remember things like understatement and hyperbole. And these are keywords from a previous lesson that I've just got on a piece of paper, and it's on the desk, and they can use that whenever they need, because they have to persuade me who's going to be their favourite. They also have some blank hexagons, and those blank hexagons are for writing simple single ideas. Now, the students who are, perhaps you've got students who are relational and students who are just at the simple level, you could have the substitution tables supporting the students to create their simple single statements. Whereas the students who are at the relational level could be writing their own. So you can see this is really easy for differentiation. So simple hexagons for organising their ideas and their writing. Writing one idea on each hexagon allows them to play around with the order of language as well. And I also have these other hexagons which have ordering words, the conjunctive adverbs already printed on them, so that when they do order their ideas ready to feed back, what they can do is they can have, and I'll show you an example of this, they can have, firstly, Wilbur is only lovable, whereas Charlotte is the most intelligent creature in the world. So you can see that they've now improved their responses from before. So they had Wilbur is very lovable, Charlotte is very clever. They've improved it, the use of the reusable hexagons, so they're just laminated so you can wipe them clean, use your board wipers on them. The use of them means that mistakes are okay, they're part of the journey. We can cross out, we can rub out, we can underline, we can recreate. The flashcards that they've got are being used so that they can make adjustments to what they've done, so they can look back at previous learning and in their own time make those adjustments to make what they're writing better. The ultimate, what this is leading to is that they are speaking out loud in class and putting their own ideas together. The fact that they used a divergent question to put their own ideas together is the challenge element of this. When you've got simple single, students who are at the unistructural level, simple single ideas, what we're doing is we're trying to give them new knowledge. We're giving them, they're gathering that knowledge. When we're at multistructural, the students might be still gathering that new knowledge so that they have that base of knowledge. When we get to students who are EAL, but they are relational, we need to allow them to practice in many different ways. And for a divergent question, this could be for any topic. This can be for science, maths, history, whatever. But the idea is that they are speaking out loud, organising their ideas, and really wrestling with these ideas. And then the goal is obviously bilingual. And if you have students who are in the class who are bilingual, challenge these students. Not to trip them up to say, haha, you're not the best yet. You know, it's about creating students who are confident, who are proud to be bilingual, who recognise their home language is just as important as their new language, and support them in continuing to develop an appreciation for all languages. Having students who are EAL or bilingual in your classroom is an opportunity for cultural growth for every single student in that classroom. Remember that when they come in that silent phase, that they are on a journey. That journey is towards bilingual. You are there to support them. And just like with anything else that I do, this is a problem that needs to be solved, but there is a solution to that problem if you stop, observe that problem, really look at that problem in detail, and then test solutions and look to see what the results of those solutions are. And then really thinking about how you are part of that journey for that child towards bilingual. Well, I hope you enjoyed that. I hope you've got some ideas from that. I know that there's time for questions in a moment. Before I pass back over to Costa, I just want to do a little plug for championing a pedagogical mindset, which is a really exciting new CPD package that we have been working on together at VIMA. We're looking for host schools to run collaborative, ongoing CPD program. This is a really excellent program that is about creating highly effective teaching and learning communities within your school. This is not a CPD program where people come in one time, deliver something, and then you run off and do it by yourself. This is about working together to create excellence. So if you are interested in this, please do get in touch after the webinar and pass the message on, because we need schools to be running this so that we can show you the power that this has. Also, the VIMA Research Corner, don't forget to check this out after the webinar, because there are lots of resources on there. It's a handy free library of specially selected, regularly updated educational research, so you'll find things on there for not just EAL, but a myriad of other subjects as well. So I'm going to pass back over to Costa. Thank you for listening, and I'm looking forward to any questions.
Thank you very much, Lisa. That was very insightful and talking us through some of the strategies and the way that we should be approaching you know, EAL learners and the things that we can do as teachers. And it is a difficult thing. You know, we've all been teachers in the classroom where we have a large majority of students that are EAL learners, and it's always useful to have strategies. I always think, though, that differentiation is also a way of thinking about teaching and learning, and it's not just about the strategies that we use. It's really thinking about how can I facilitate my lesson, how can I deliver my material differently, the content, so that, you know, my EAL learners or SEN learners can have access to. And when you actually said, you know, it's about really knowing your students, that's really important. I've got one question here who's asking me that in a lot of international schools there are lots of students who are EAL. You know, they might be from that country and they've chosen to actually go to a British school or to an English speaking school. When you have lots of students in the classroom that are learning English as an additional language, what would you say would be your kind of 3 top tips for those kind of teachers that have a large majority of students who are EAL?
Right, well, I know this sort of context really well, because the students that we're working with in Nepal, they are all EAL because they've chosen to, their curriculum is actually taught in English, but each of the students come from different tribes, and so there might be sort of 16 different languages within that classroom. The things that work in that context are: one, don't forget that their home language exists. Allow them to think in their own language. If you're setting a challenge, if you can set that challenge in their home language and give them support in responding to that within English, then that's a really nice way forward. Does that make sense? That's number one. So number one, challenge in their own language, but give them support in responding in English. Two, slow it down from your perspective as the teacher. You might have loads to get through in the curriculum, but think about what are the main things that you can teach them to begin with that will tie everything together. I mentioned this a little bit about the reading, the writing, the communication, the mathematics. It's about finding the language that you'll use again and again and again, and really spending time on developing that, because then the more that you have to add later, that will happen quicker if you get the basics right. Does that make sense?
Yeah. And lots, I mean, some people say that there's lots of students that do speak the same language, and they're learning English. So would you still promote the language that they speak at home in the classroom as well?
Absolutely. I told you, I just recently read about a teacher who was, if they spoke their own language 3 times in a classroom, they punished them by making them read out poetry. Now imagine that, right? Number one, poetry has now become a punishment. So they're going to lose their love of poetry, and poetry is awesome, I promise. So there's that. And then they're being punished for using their own language. What message does that send to them? That English is the only language that they should use? That's wrong. So I think that their own language, when I'm learning Nepalese, I think it through in my own language. So I'm applying what they're teaching me to what I already understand. So that me as a learner, I know that my own language is helpful. I think the people who might be scared of them using their own language might be teachers who don't understand their own language. So that's a lack of control. I think that if you know your learners and the teacher and learner has a really good relationship, then allowing them to speak in their own language and to think in their own language shouldn't be a problem. I would absolutely say that that's something that they should continue to allow to happen, because that's bilingual. It's the journey to bilingual. It's not the journey to being English. It's the journey to bilingual.
Yeah. Thank you very much. We've got another question here. You mentioned the learning maths and the literacy maths. How could we give some advice there on how they can be put together from a whole school perspective? I know that when I was in a leader in my school, we put together the literacy maths, and they were very, very helpful. Can you just talk through maybe perhaps how a school could maybe use those or start thinking about putting those together?
Yeah, I know that schools usually have literacy maths, so if you've already got them, make sure that you use the ones you've got. But what we did was we created our own, and we didn't just have, like, I was the advanced skills teaching and learning leader, so I was in charge of the project. But if I'd have created them and given them to the teachers, they would have put them on their shelves and never used them. What we did was got everybody together to contribute towards them. So all of the English teachers created the English ones, all of the maths teachers created the maths ones, but then all of the staff got together to appraise them, to critique them, to pull them apart and say this wouldn't work for us, this would, so that it became something that everybody had created. It's worth spending the time on that, because it means that they get used. Instead of just downloading a literacy map that's already been created, that might be quick and easy, but it's not something that you've invested in. So I would say step one, invest some time in really thinking about what you are going to use, what it's going to be used for, how it's going to be purposeful, and work together to create that.
And that's a really good resource, I think, for students to be able to access within the classroom. They have it in front of them, and well, not just in the classroom. They can use it to an independent studying as well, and it's a really good resource for them to access. Thank you very much for that. Some really good suggestions there, and this was just an introductory webinar just to get us thinking about our EAL students in particular. Just a few things I would like to say just before we close today. I think it's really important to create a platform where teachers can learn from each other. And I think the best thing, we always have, you know, the bright spots in our schools and the excellence teaching that we see. And I think, you know, creating a platform where teachers can actually learn from each other and see how they're actually delivering and teaching is actually one of the most important things that we can do for our teachers. I always say, you know, happy teachers equals happy students, and we should be creating a professional you know, platform for where teachers can learn and go into classrooms and watch each other teach, and lesson observations, learning walkthroughs, you know, book scrutinies. They should, you know, all be seen as an opportunity for professional growth. They shouldn't be seen as an opportunity where someone is judged. And I think that's really important if we're going to improve teaching and learning and look at how we could, you know, what really works for our students. The last thing I would say is that obviously we have delivered a range of webinars, different styles of webinars. They are all on our website, and also as well as our CPD packages and our long-term CPD packages, which includes in-house and online learning. We are giving preferential rates to COVID schools, to BSME schools, and to Forvisia schools as well, because we're all members of those bodies. And just lastly, we will be sending a feedback form after this webinar, suggestions for future webinars, any suggestions that you have around our webinars, just please let us know. We are also offering premium webinars where they can go on for 2 or 3 hours. If you're interested in a premium webinar for your teachers, then obviously please do get in touch. And if you are interested, finally, just a little plug from me, if you are interested in our Champion and Pedagogical Mindset course or any particular type of CPD, it doesn't need to happen at the beginning or the end of the year. It doesn't have to be delivered to all staff. Then please get in touch. I hope you've enjoyed today. Thank you very much for listening, and we will be back soon with another webinar for you. So have a great afternoon. Thank you very much.